world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, August 14th, 2024, and I'm your host, Marty Bennett. And today, over the next half an hour, we're going to be going through 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And before we get into those questions, I want to give a shout out to all those watching live on our social channels for SMIE Consulting, those that watch on repeat on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook, and of course those that listen to the audio-only podcast version, where we've now got over 3,600 downloads. So very proud of that, and appreciate you all being a part of the SMIE Consulting family for our 2 main services for the higher ed community, both the Midweek Roundup here on Wednesdays and our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings. For those that aren't already subscribed, that newsletter comes in 2 different versions. One, an email version you can subscribe to on our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Enter your details, and you'll get that delivered Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern. Or if you prefer to receive your international ed news via LinkedIn, you can subscribe to that newsletter version as well. It comes a half hour earlier at about 8:30 a.m. Eastern. And between the two versions of the newsletter, we now have over 2,000 subscribers in the international ed community that are getting our news each week. And we're so humbled by the fact that so many of you have chosen to receive that news and make it a part of your international edification each week. So let's get right into our questions for this middle of August, pre-arrival days for most U.S. colleges and universities as our new international students start arriving on campus in the next week or 2. It's always the most exciting time of the year to be on campus in international education as we welcome new students from all over the globe who are excited, who are drained, who are on adrenaline and just exhausted from their trips. But it's also just an amazing time to see the fruits of our labor, so to speak, over the last year or longer, depending on the student, to finally see them arrive on campus and what joy they're going to bring to our institutions. So let's get right to the questions. First up, what strategies work to reach prospects today? And we always focus on this in our newsletter stories, in our social media section of that newsletter, as well as here on the Roundup, when we talk about the value of living where your audience lives, on the right platforms, with the right content, at the right times. All of that matters in terms of getting your message out in front of the right students at the right time. So the couple of articles that I'll share with you this week relate to what are students wanting right now in terms of information from institutions, and what are some ways that we can spice up what we do, frankly, because we have institutional messages and value propositions and all these things that we try and communicate, but are we doing that in the most effective way? So the 2 articles that I'll share will kind of give you the both sides of that coin in terms of how we can best reach prospects today. Now, over the years, we've heard everybody say email is dead in marketing circles. But those claims are often countered quite quickly by those that say, well, no, this generation does like to still get emails, and social isn't the only thing they're on. Yes, they spend a lot of time there, but is that where they want, when it comes to the college search, is that how they want to communicate directly with you? Now, Keystone Education Group, they run a lot of the larger search engines, college search engine providers, profile sites that have, for whether it's UniQuest, that service, post applicant, or ComFlow service that they bought, and other services, Master Studies, all these others that they offer. They have these search sites, and they do a lot of surveys and that type of thing. So they've done a survey for between February and April this year, specifically to students interested in the U.S. and Canada. So pretty relevant for our audiences here in North America. So they asked 2 important questions, which I'll share with you here. First up, 69% want to communicate with universities via email. So A little bit surprising when you think of the Gen Z types that we deal with each day, who prefer text, who prefer social media as ways to get their information. But when it comes to studying in the United States or Canada, they want to have official emails. So that's a good sign that what you've been doing with your ComFlows in terms of making sure that you're personalizing as much as possible, that you're including the kind of content that really shapes in that to prospective students' mind what it might be like for them if they were to choose your campus by including peer contacts or ability to connect with current students who are on your campus now. All of that matters. But email, surprisingly, 69% identify that this is the way they want to communicate with you. So that's encouraging. So there's lion's share, more than 2/3 still want to have the emails from you, and that's good because we rely on that, don't we? So the good news is don't give up the email fight because it does matter. The other data point that I'll focus on for this, then there's a link in the chat that you'll be able to download the report, and if you got the newsletter earlier on the week on Monday, you would have received this as well. One of the links there was this report. The other point that is a little bit more troubling for many of us is that 87%, almost 9 in 10, expect a response from universities when they email within 24 hours. So that is probably the one area that I think most institutions struggle with in terms of having staff bandwidth to do that on a regular basis. And what the expectations might be on your end in terms of how you communicate to future students about this issue is maybe a middle ground, or at least having auto responses that might go out, particularly over the weekends or out of office hours, that explain the situation. But having a response from universities within 24 hours of them opening or sending a message, of course, doing that Friday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern, and then everything's closed for 2 days until Monday morning. So that's the 24-hour rule. Do you want to say business days, all that kind of thing? One business day is a general rule. So is that the way to go? How are you handling that in terms of meeting expectations or modifying student expectations so that they're aware, hey, you're human, your staff are human, they have lives outside of their jobs, so they need the time away from work to spend with their family and friends. So those are the two key data points that I think this report will have you at least focusing on and there's more obviously in the report that you want to take a look at. And again, it's a sample size of about 4,100 students looking at the United States and Canada that the Keystone Group had surveyed. The other is other article I'm sharing is from our friends at InTED with the title, "Is Your Content Functional but Vibeless?" Many of us would say fairly confidently that the content we have, it has the right information, it has the right messaging going out in terms of timing, in terms of getting all the details, I's dotted, T's crossed, all of that. But does it really have that va-va-voom, as some would say? Does it have a good vibe to it that represents your campus? Is it in the voice of your campus? So there are many of us who would say, yeah, we got the content, but is it as good as it could be in terms of the best representation, the most accurate reflection of who we are, what we believe, and do we communicate that in a fun way? And one of the subtitle of this article is 3 Golden Rules to Get Your Groove Back into your lead gen. So this is meant primarily for kind of attracting that attention of your future students once you buy names or go to these search sites to drive students to apply. So this is a very relevant topic for all of us, because I'm sure many of us don't feel we have the bandwidth to necessarily focus on this. The fact that we have maybe a separate ComFlow for international students is a huge step, but does it really reflect to the level of detail and specificity and vibe that we should be communicating to future international students on our campuses? So there's some great examples of what they're talking about in the article. I won't go into those to give that to you, but I'll focus on the three rules that they share in this article by InTED. First up, golden rule number one, how you know how your audience segments will react to your content. So this involves a lot of info gathering and having some research done of consumer insights, what's driving their decision making and their actions, how the drivers change based on student interests, where they're from in the world, what they want to study and do for their careers, economic factors, cultural backgrounds, safety concerns, social justice perspectives, perhaps, depending on where they are, environmental, you could add to that list. So there's a lot of things that, depending on the message, depending on where they are, what their background is, what they're looking to study, all of these things might be priorities for them. That are you addressing those concerns in your marketing? And so that's first. So doing your homework, really, taking that deep dive in the research, talking to your current students from those countries that you're targeting, and understand how certain messages might play in the way you word it. Might be funny for an American audience, but maybe won't be for an overseas audience. How do you figure this out? You talk to your current students. You talk to your recent grads who are alums from those regions that you're focusing on, and find out from them, hey, does this represent who we are at UNLV? Does this make sense? And be honest. And that's something that makes a big deal for how your message is received. So that's unfortunately the failing of a lot of comm plans, was when you don't segment by audience and have just one size fits all in terms of messaging. What motivates a student in your home state to study at your university is going to be very different than what motivates a student halfway around the world to come all that way to study at your school. So understanding the channels that they're using, understanding on social and online tools that they use, what the economic conditions are, what the push and pull factors are for students in that country that might be coming. So it can get very, very easily stuck in the weeds if you try to get too far down. But if you are doing specific campaigns for certain countries, certain regions, you want to have at least a baseline understanding of these other external factors that are influencing these students' potential interest in your school and what's on their mind. So level of English proficiency, music, social justice, parents' roles in their college search, connection with your community. How does that exist? How are you fostering that? So some really good content there. The second golden rule, know your admissions process. We all joke, and anyone who's traveled internationally knows the answer to almost every question we get from international students, whether it's about deadlines, about scholarships, about admissions process, about life on campus, is the one answer we can all give with confidence is, it depends. And that is so much the case, particularly if you're talking about comparing institution to institution, but even within institutions at graduate program level, there are differences between programs in terms of the admissions process, in terms of requirements, testing, deadlines, all of that. So knowing that content and how you make that clear to your future students, what it looks like, that is something we oftentimes forget. So making that a priority is a very important step in that process. And the final golden rule here is golden rule number 3, create content with your institution's vibe. And this is it. This is where the rubber hits the road in terms of making a significant difference in terms of what your future students are digesting from what you send and how they digest it. What do they want to see? They want to see what classroom engagement looks like and what the student community looks like. You want to make it seem like they can picture themselves ideally on your campus through virtual tours and current students talking about their experiences and showing them around the campus. All that matters because they want to see what students are like, how they dress, how they interact with each other, what they do on a daily basis. that talk about the academic programs they're going to be studying, what they're doing in their downtime, how they study, what platforms that they're using on campus to communicate. All of these things matter because that's what a student wants to know is what's my life going to be like when I'm on your campus. And if you can represent that well by using your current students, using the kind of activities that they're going through, the language that they're using, the socials that they're on, and incorporate that into that messaging and creating that vibe, that is really what you will be time well spent when you can tick all those boxes off in terms of how you do that. So the last golden rule addition one that they mentioned here is that you want to be in touch to work with a team that truly vibes. So having people around you who get it too. Needs to be everybody on the same page in terms of who's creating the content, who's implementing it, who's sending the messages, who's responding to those messages. All that needs to be a part of the team approach to future student messaging. So do pay some attention to that. Now let's move on to our second question of the day, and that is, what's the truth around visa wait times globally? I was asked to contribute some quotes to an article and responding to some questions about visa wait times and what the U.S. State Department is doing last week after some articles have come out, particularly after the EdUSA Forum, where some folks addressed some of the key issues around wait times that some folks are feeling. And the PI News came out with this article, Vast Disparities in Visa Wait Times Revealed Across U.S. Embassies. And the title of the article is probably not the best reflection of what the content's really about, because there are always vast disparities in visa wait times. That's since time immemorial. No one has been able to go into every embassy and consulate around the world and have 1 day wait times or 2 day wait times or 3 day wait times, when that's never been the case everywhere, because there are always bottlenecks in certain cities, certain countries where there's high demand and not enough staffing, whatever it might be. So the title is really not a great reflection of the content of the article, which does reflect some information that shows that, yes, despite the huge disparities, there are some, it's kind of worded backward of how I would have put it, despite a huge step forward made by the U.S. State Department in terms of staffing, in terms of adjustments in certain countries, there are now those huge disparities in wait times. And that all is down to demand and supply. Supply of consular officers to do the interviews, and that's, for those unfamiliar, at U.S. embassies and consulates around the world, the people who do the majority of the visa interviews are either are consular folks that are first or second tour in terms of where they go out of the Foreign Service School in the U.S. When they do their first overseas assignments, the first couple of rotations they do for 2 years, 3 years at a time are as frontline consular work, doing the visa interviews every day. So that is most of what they do. And South Asia right now, and certainly West Sub-Saharan Africa reflect probably the areas that see the most significant visa wait times. And those are down to supply and demand issues in that, what I just said. It's a supply also of students that want, or supply of available visa interview slots, and also the demand of the number of students who want to go to the U.S. for study. And obviously, for many years, going back to post 9/11 days, you saw international students been given priority visa appointment consideration at embassies and consulates, because it was identified by the State Department as a priority and by the government, U.S. government, to prioritize students who would want to come and study, because they have very specific deadlines they have to meet. So they have in some countries, and I was asked specifically about and commented specifically about India, that there have been very significant improvements made in visa wait times. Some of this is coming out of the pandemic, so Back then, there were 129 and 143 days, respectively, in Kolkata and Mumbai, that are now down to 25 days for a student visa appointment. Delhi is down, were 245 days 2 years ago, now down to 23. So some really significant success stories there, and they've had a very motivated ambassador, U.S. ambassador, who had, as he said, a direct charge from President Biden to improve the situation for visas there. And that was addressed. They hired more staff. They've opened up a new consulate building in Hyderabad that has many more visa interview windows. There are plans for 2 or 3 more in the coming 5 years. So there's significant steps have been taken. There have also been some structural changes to that process. There was the pandemic waiver for applicants, that for a waiver of the in-person interview requirement, that students who had gotten a visa, of a U.S. visa of any kind, within the last 4 to 5 years would not have to go in person for the visa interview, because that visa interview triggers the security clearances. That is probably the biggest logistical challenge time-wise for students getting through the process, because once that's done, there's not a whole lot new that happens. The quicker checks can happen once they've applied by paper or with the online DS-160 forms and such. So there's no need to have that in person. So that's the biggest bottleneck everywhere in the world, potential bottleneck everywhere in the world. It all depends on how many consular officer slots are available to do these interviews in the peak periods during the summer. And in countries where there were significant staff cuts because of the pandemic, because of reciprocal changes in staffing at embassies and consulates, depending on the countries, staff forced to leave the countries, not returning, retraining new staff, retiring, all of these things, changing professions, all these things impacted visa officer staff availability in many of the major markets. India is probably the biggest example of that, because they're the #1 source of students in the U.S. now. So removing the in-person requirements for students who've had a U.S. visa within the last 5 years. They've also added, State Department has added, at the discretion of the visa officer, the interviews can be waived. That's a new one. And that for emergency appointments, for those coming up on their program start dates, that there are room made or appointments reserved for students in the days and weeks right before institutions start their classes in the fall, around this time of year, for those students to get those appointments. So there's some interesting movement in that front in India as well. So are other countries that are facing these bottlenecks going to be able to take advantage of that too? We see situations in Africa, in Accra, Ghana. That's the longest U.S. Embassy wait time for students right now, 361 days. So that's outrageous. In Nepal, Kathmandu, 318 days. Dhaka, Bangladesh, 236. Another African country, Benin, 206 days. Burkina Faso, and one of my favorite city names of all time, Ouagadougou, at 196. Abuja, 190. In Rangoon, 150. Lagos, 133. Gabon, 119. So, and Armenia, Yerevan, Armenia, 112. So all those over 100 to 361 days. So those are the longest U.S. Embassy wait times globally. So that data certainly is not encouraging in those countries with those long of a wait times. And students and their agent partners or counselors really need to help them plan ahead. And that's why I think the State Department also made the ability for students to apply up to a year now before their program start date for their visas. The challenge is most institutions aren't issuing I-20s a year in advance. That was a nice window to have, but most of us aren't doing I-20s a year out. Maybe we'll need to start doing that, but we oftentimes for admission classes, particularly at selective schools, a student admitted 1 year isn't necessarily guaranteed a spot the following year. So this is all something we need to be considering. So some really interesting data points there, and I was really happy to be included in this. When you look at it, when we talk about perspective on visas and that type of thing, global perspective, in the U.S. we're at a huge disadvantage when it comes to requiring an in-person interview. Most other nations, Australia, Canada, UK, do not require an in-person interview for a student visa to be granted. So we create this bottleneck on our own by having that in-person requirement. Will the security checks go on even whether the student has to come for an interview or not? Of course, those security checks alone would reduce the denial rates and the wait times dramatically if you don't have an in-person interview requirements, because it's a paperwork decision you can spend, and a lot of countries outsource that. The UK does. So we see what that can do in other countries and how easy it is for things to move through. But in the US, it's just not an easy process. We make it difficult on ourselves in the name of national security. And that's something obviously that has to be balanced with all other factors. So that's the second question. The final question of the day, which we'll get to here, is Australia's international ed sector bracing for a storm? And the short answer is yes. And we'll see you next week. No, this isn't real big news, but it certainly has come at a time when there's a variety of things that have happened over the last few months. The government has put in place a number of policies in the past few months to limit the number of new migrants coming to Australia. That it's not just students, but it has affected other sectors as well. They've introduced new funding minimums that students have to show that perhaps are above certain, and they do one amount for every level of study. So that is different than the U.S., where it's whatever the institutional total cost is what you have to show through a combination of sources. So Canada and Australia do that. UK is slightly different. But they're trying to root out some of the dodgy providers, agent providers, and some institutions that are probably less than above board. And some of that is, they're going to be the most directly impacted. But some of the broader policies that are now coming into place are potentially a cap of 40% on any institution can't have more than 40% of their students from overseas. And that the impact of the visa situation is now reducing interest, reducing applications, reducing numbers. And the fear is, and the articles that I'll share from Australia is the amendments to that the government is proposing the cap will be implemented January 25 to 40%, a maximum of their student body. That providers and members in the international ed community are really pushing back against this. That would lead to significant damage to the economy. 30,000 Australians employed in the international ed sector could have their jobs at risk. That's probably all of them, but will they all be at risk? No, some of them will, yeah. There's going to be financial implications here, $1.4 billion a year, perhaps at least, cut from institutional budgets because of lack of revenue coming from these students. So very significant damage being done in Australia and Canada and the UK that we've seen as a result of changes in government policy. So we'll see where it goes. But Australia, yes, you're going to be facing a storm, sad to say. But that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. We appreciate you being with us as we go through these topics each year. We're going to be in a new location, moving house, this coming week, right as I leave for a trip. So I'll be in various cities in South Asia over the next 2 weeks, and hoping to, on the 21st and the 28th, be connecting with you from Hyderabad and then from Vadodara in Gujarat, India, next time out. So there's where we are. Looking forward to chatting with you again in the weeks and months to come. Cheers.